It was March 29th, 1918. A concert was about to begin at the Church of Saint Gervais in Paris when suddenly a shell from a German supergun collided into the building. The walls crumbled. Black smoke filled the air. Almost 100 civilians died in the attack. One of the victims was 24-year-old Rose Marie Ormond. But what does she have to do with this painting? Well, everything. This piece is called Gassed by John Singer Sargent. We're placed outside, confronted with a row of 10 soldiers from the side, connected by holding onto each other's shoulders. Bandages cover their eyes. But why? It's because this is the aftermath of a gas attack during the First World War, and this is a medical orderly leading the soldiers to a medical post, which is a tent structure where the soldiers would go to receive medical treatment. We can see more of them in the background on the other side of the painting. Ropes attach the tent to the ground and surround a wooden walkway. These soldiers are clearly struggling. One of them exaggeratedly lifts his leg to avoid tripping over the boarded walkway. Another looks like he's about to throw up. The ground around them is covered with other wounded soldiers. Some of them clutch their bandages and eyes. One takes a swig from his water bottle. There's so much tension in this piece. Sargent paints such a raw and ruthless scene before an otherwise stunning backdrop, as the end-of-day sun washes the sky in soft yellows, blues, and pinks. By the way, they actually just restored this painting, and this is what it looked like before, when it had this really intense yellowed varnish on it. I mean, it's like a totally different painting. Anyway, a full moon peeks up beside another row of soldiers. We can see one poor man is vomiting, while two medical orderlies help them toward the post. We can barely make out biplanes dogfighting in the distance, overhead. And amidst all this chaos, there's this tiny moment of calm, a soccer game in the distance, illuminated by the glow of sunset. It's like Sargent slipped in this little detail to remind us that for these soldiers, this is just another day. This is their life. And life goes on. Mustard gas is no joke. It can inflict widespread damage to the body, including the skin, eyes, and respiratory system. It can lead to blisters and severe burns on the skin. It attacks the mucous membranes, which can lead to acute and long-term lung issues, nausea, and vomiting. Maybe that one goes without saying. It can also cause temporary or permanent blindness and even death if your exposure is high enough. That's what makes the lack of protective clothing on these guys all the more heartbreaking, because they likely experienced a lot of needless suffering. Speaking of suffering, when this painting was displayed in the Royal Academy in 1919, some people couldn't stand it, like writer Virginia Woolf, who says, "A large picture by Mr. Sargent called Gassed at last pricked some nerve of protest, or perhaps of humanity. In order to emphasize his point that the soldiers wearing bandages round their eyes cannot see and therefore claim our compassion, he makes one of them raise his leg to the level of his elbow. This little piece of overemphasis was the final scratch of the surgeon's knife, which is said to hurt more than the whole operation." The Athenaeum piled on, criticizing Sargent of an oversimplified take. They wrote, "This picture is a descriptive work. It recounts the result of a gas attack in very much the language that an English schoolboy of the self-conscious age might use." Yes, you know, a lot of fellows stumbling along, blinded, don't you see, hanging on to each other's shoulders. Lots of other chaps lying about too ill to shift for themselves. Yes. The schoolboy might pause here for a moment, and then with a brilliant smile of inspiration, "Funny thing, you know, football going on in the next field. Bit tragic, what?" I'm just gonna go ahead and apologize for my English schoolboy accent. It's over now, I promise. Yet some critics, like P.G. Conady from The Observer, thought that Sargent failed because he didn't go far enough. He writes, "Mr. Sargent has spent months at the front to collect the material for this picture. He is so keen an observer, as a rule, that it would be foolhardy to accuse him of inaccuracy. Yet, remembering the grotesque nightmare horror of the choking and vomiting zoology Zouaves in Robert's gas attack, I cannot help feeling that this calm procession of gas-blinded men carrying their trench coats, rifles, and other paraphernalia as though they were returning from a picnic is singularly unconvincing. Despite the haters, the Royal Academy of Arts voted Gast Picture of the Year in 1919. Sargent was in his 60s when the British government asked him to create this painting. They wanted a piece that would showcase Anglo-American cooperation in the war. So of course they asked Sargent, an American who had spent the majority of his life in England. So Sargent left for France in July 1918 with his friend Henry Tonks. But finding the right subject for the painting proved more challenging than he expected. Sargent writes, "The further forward one goes, the more scattered and meager everything is. The nearer to danger, the fewer and more hidden the men. The more dramatic the situation, the more it becomes an empty landscape. The Ministry of Information expects an epic, and how can one do an epic without masses of men?" But before long, Sargent's search for inspiration would end when he witnessed the aftermath of a German bombardment using mustard gas. His friend, Henry Tonks, who was with him at the time, writes, "After tea, we heard that there were a good many gas cases at a dressing station, so we went there. The dressing station was situated on the road and consisted of a number of huts and a few tents. Gas cases kept coming in, led along in parties of about 6, just as Sargent had depicted them, by an orderly. They sat or lay down in the grass. There must have been several hundred, evidently suffering a great deal, chiefly I fancy from their eyes, which were covered up by a piece of lint." Sargent was very struck by the scene and immediately made a lot of notes. So Sargent finally found his subject, and the War Memorials Committee eventually agreed to the change. But I think we need to pause for a second, because Sargent never wanted anything to do with the war. He considered himself an internationalist and hated the idea of creating propaganda, but he did it anyway. So what made him change his mind? Sargent had a very successful art career and had pretty much earned himself the title of portraitist to the wealthy elite. And it's because he was really talented. He had this unique way of capturing the essence of people like no one else. But as he got older, he began to feel unsatisfied with his reputation. He felt like he'd spent his whole life airbrushing rich people to make them look better than he thought they did. In fact, he said it was like making homely people handsome to please their family. In the early 1900s, Sargent began spending summers in Switzerland, Italy, and Spain, painting landscapes outdoors. He often brought along his sisters, Emily and Violet's kids, Rosemarie and Wren. Rosemarie accompanied Sargent a lot on his outings and quickly became one of his favorite models. Here she is posing when she was only 13. When Rosemarie got older, she married a man named Robert André Michel, and World War I broke out only a year later. Robert joined immediately and quickly recognized the gravity of the situation. He writes, "I would willingly die to make France greater, more beautiful, more worthy of her secular genius, less attached to base interests, to egotistical pleasures. It is for the ideal France that I fight, a peaceful France." Robert died days later from a gunshot wound to the heart. Devastated by her husband's death, Rosemarie felt compelled to contribute more to the war effort. She became a nurse at a rehabilitation hospital in Rouy, caring for soldiers blinded by mustard gas and other weapons. The war raged on, and in late 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany to help the struggling Allied forces. Germany, fearing defeat, intensified its efforts to end the war swiftly by targeting civilians. They developed a massive supergun named the Paris gun with the intent to bombard the city. The first shots caused little damage, but left Parisians on edge. Despite her parents' plea to leave for a few days, Rosemarie decided to stay. She wanted to attend a Good Friday service at the Church of Saint Gervais in Paris to hear the beautiful music. Rosemarie found solace in music. It was March 29th, 1918. The concert was just about to begin at the Church of Saint Gervais in Paris when a shell from the German supergun collided into the building. The walls crumbled around them. Black smoke filled the air. 91 civilians died in the attack. Most of the corpses and the rubble were unrecognizable, but some were identified by engravings on their jewelry and engagement rings. This is how it was discovered that a woman named Rosemarie Ormond was one of the victims. She was 24 years old. Sargent was supposed to go out to dinner the night he was informed of his niece's death, but he canceled his plans. He writes, "I have just had bad news from Paris. My niece has been killed, and I think I won't go out to dinner. It was Rose Marie. She was very young and one of the most beautiful women I ever knew." This meant a lot coming from someone like John Singer Sargent, who was never really known to express his emotions. Upon hearing the news from Rose Marie's in-laws, Sargent replied back, "I can't tell you how sorry I am, and how I feel the loss of the most charming girl who ever lived." Only a couple of months after this, Sargent was asked by the British government to create a painting to commemorate the war. The artist never married and had no kids of his own. He loved his niece deeply, and even though he wanted nothing to do with the war had taken the most charming girl who ever lived. And that was simply unacceptable. So why did Sargent change his mind and take this commission? What changed? Well, everything.